Hello again. Lisa, hello Sirith, Palm Dad, C Slick. Wendy Carlos reference? No. Oh, maybe actually. We'll learn together. I don't know. It's a good question. So, tonight is actually a patron request. I delayed it a little bit because I was fading really fast after the almost 4-hour stream we just did. But I've got a second wind, and we are going to do it. They've been very gracious to allow me to do this, so. First off, okay. So there's 2 videos we're going over today, amounting to about 57 minutes, 58 minutes. So we're going to go over those, and that's about it. I actually have no idea what to expect. I've never covered this stuff before, but dear God, you have no idea what I'm looking at here. Music stuff is bizarre. Like, look at this thing. Look at this monstrosity. What even is that? It's like a terminal from a spaceship in Doctor Who. Well, let's see what this lovely ginger lad has to say.
Jeremy, this is Red Means Recording, and today's video is not a video that I wanted to have to make. Nobody should want to have to make this video.
Okay, so when I go here, the inside story of Tavistock's NHS Gender Identity Clinic. What is this? Clinicians and young people speak about the pioneering and controversial London facility now facing closure. Oh, this is the, I see, this is the Tavistock. Yeah, right, we talked about this. Okay. Gotcha. Okay, yeah. We've talked about this before. This is the one that Zizek was ranting about. Okay, it's coming back to me now. Sorry, I'm not English. I don't remember these names.
Because if they do have to, it means that the problem is still ongoing. And that problem is the tearing apart of one of the most beloved communities and a very prestigious company in the audio industry. We're talking about Spitfire Audio, we're talking about Piano Book, and we're talking about Spitfire's co-founder, Christian Henson. Spitfire and Piano Book have both internally and externally championed for diversity, inclusivity, and democratization of the music technology world through their products, through their free products called labs, through Piano Book, which through a community creates multi-sampled instruments to share with the world. Unfortunately, we find ourselves in a position where, because of Christian Henson's actions, all of that has been put on the chopping block because now people are uncomfortable using the products. They are traumatized by the events after what Christian Henson's done, and it's just a mess. And that's what this video is about.
I heard that too, diversity.
The reason I'm making this video is not to call out or cancel somebody. The reason I'm making this video is to explain the positions of people that were involved directly with this conflict, at least the few people that I talked to, and how one small action on Christian Henson's part has really torn asunder everything that these communities tried to build. I have been sort of involved in this via tweeting and talking to Spitfire behind the scenes once or twice because I was doing some promo for them. And after tweeting about this, seeing that Christian Henson was back at his position, I had a lot of people reach out to me, and I listened to their stories. And I was like, okay, this video needs to get made. We need to talk about this. We need to figure out a way to go forward. So that's what we're doing here. We're talking about Spitfire Audio, Piano Book, Christian Henson,
in the ocean,
transphobia, unfortunately. So let's get started.
God, I love that terminal behind them. I don't understand any of it, but I love it.
Spitfire Audio was founded in 2007 by Christian Henson and Paul Thompson, both composers.
Thought that was going to be a sponsor for a second.
It is considered one of the industry's premier sample library companies, and they make virtual instrument sample libraries used for music production with high quality and like a huge variety. We're talking about everything from like full orchestras to synthesizers, guitars, pianos, and a ton more. They've worked with very prestigious composers and creators throughout the process of this, very diverse contributors. They're also well known for their labs products, which are free, high quality versions of sampled instruments, unique instruments created as passion projects that tons of composers depend on. So full disclosure, I mean, I have Spitfire products. You know, I have Albion Tundra. I have some of the stuff that they made for Contact. It's really good stuff. Like, I really like their products, and I'd really like to be able to continue using them without feeling terrible about it. Piano Book is a website that enables a global collective of dedicated users to share high-quality, multi-sampled instruments of a dizzying variety. It was founded in 2018 by Christian Henson and is run by a small group of passionate volunteers. Up until recently, there was a dedicated brand manager.
I wonder if any of my editors use this. I am curious now.
Employed by Spitfire, who oversaw Piano Book, while the rest of the staff was volunteers.
It's crazy just like how deep like other industries are. Like, I had no idea about this until somebody who like watches this stuff sent this my way. But this is like a massive deal. This is a massive channel. This was a decently large video. Just never reached my ears. Never.
Hey, it's Editing Jeremy here. I'm going to be popping in now and then to just kind of add some extra context, especially regarding things like the Tavistock Clinic and stuff that maybe I didn't quite get a chance to cover in the script before this video was filmed. I also want to quickly mention that Ben Jordan, aka the Flashbulb, was mass reported off Twitter. His account is gone because he engaged with transphobes who decided to...
You're wrong here. The JP mindset, as well as the UK conservative turf movement, is that trans people are mentally ill or just lying for attention. It's very toxic and has resulted in a rise in anti-trans violence. This is entirely civilly and moderately stated.
Mass report an innocuous tweet of his that stated that Jordan Peterson and Christian Henson had transphobic views. That was pretty much it. So there's two things I want to...
You gotta love how free speech Twitter under Elon Musk is, and I mean what everyone seems to be just fine with, is actually just... they get to play the SJW censor. It really is just that, with the phantasm of, oh, well, we've all been censored our entire lives, when really what it is they couldn't go for 5 seconds without ranting about Jews. Thank you, Queens LBT, for the $5. Yeah, I know I use their stuff, and Spitfire is like one of my go-to companies for the stuff, especially labs. This is disappointing AF. Thank you for that. Good to know.
Say, one, fuck y'all for doing that. Two, do not engage with transphobes when they start to sea lion or debate you. There are no two sides to this. The two-side thing and the debate side thing is something that they always will do. Do not engage. Another thing is, I'm probably not going to have comments on this video, and I'm probably going to be making my Twitter private for an indefinite amount of time after this video comes out. Just be careful out there, everybody, and I'm sorry, Ben. Hopefully we get you back on Twitter. Those that volunteered were dedicated to fostering an inclusive community, both within their ranks and within the space that Piano Book users operated, such as the Piano Book Discord. They were extremely passionate about the project. They looked up to Spitfire and Christian Henson and would dedicate themselves to large projects because they believed in what Piano Book and Spitfire were doing. It's really hard to overstate how much Piano Book and Spitfire are a force in the creative world. As an educator, I see their products being used in my lessons all the time, the labs products. Because they have all these free products, they're available to people with lesser means, which is a really, really great thing. They're a big deal. And that's why what happens next is really, really shitty.
All right, here we go. The tweet.
On September 6th, 2022, Christian Henson tweeted the following. As a parent, I can no longer keep my mouth shut about this. I'm in full support of Glitter and J.K. Rowling. Please look into this. If you have young children, it's in the post, and if you have autistic children, it's probably on your doormat. So...
Glitter is Graham Lionhand, for anyone who's not familiar.
Those of you who follow gender politics, you're probably looking at this tweet and you're like, oh shit, that's really bad. And it is. But for the rest of you, let me explain why. We'll break the tweet down piece by piece, and hopefully at the end of it, you'll understand why this is not good. The bit in the original tweet about having children, autistic children, that Christian Henson made was referencing the Tavistock Clinic, where according to Graham Lynham, which Glinner, we'll get to him in a bit, quote, the parents of 1,000 children were suing for an overall wrongful diagnosis of gender dysphoria, alongside this ideology that kids who have learning difficulties such as children...
Yeah, we went over this a little while ago. Even Slavoj Žižek fell for this. Žižek I was a bit naive about for a little while. I looked into him a bit more, and I'm less and less impressed with Žižek every single day. Some of his writings are good, but as a political thinker, he plays the radical, but he's not really, no. But smart enough where you would think he would bother to actually look into material instead of just lift directly from a propaganda website, which is what he actually did. We covered his write-up a few months ago. It's just bad.
Children with autism are more prone to wrongly thinking that they have been assigned to the wrong gender. Hello, it's Editing Jeremy again. So I wanted to really make sure that I got this as right as possible, because I think a big part of Christians' radicalization comes from the fear of what theoretically is going on.
So what's actually happened with Tavistock is not that it was closed down due to a scandal. What happened with Tavistock, if I remember correctly, is it was incredibly inefficient. It was a single center that had incredibly long wait times. And so what is happening is they're moving to a more dispersed model where there are more local clinics instead of a single large center. That's my understanding of what went down. That has been spun by what was it called again? Hang on. There was a sort of a pseudo scientific page. It was that Dr. Cass person. Let's see here. Actually, no, maybe I can just find in the Zizek article. Page no longer exists. That's interesting. Anyways, we'll let him explain.
With the Tavistock Clinic. It's complicated, but I think I've kind of...
Thank you, that's it. SEGM. Thank you very much. That is exactly the one. The Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, the problem. You are definitely not the problem tonight.
Figured it out based on talking to some trans people and their perspectives on it, and also reading an article on The Guardian and doing a little bit of research. The claim that 1,000 parents are suing the Tavistock Clinic, that's from a class action lawsuit that is ongoing from a class action law firm. I watched an interview with Thomas Goodhead, who's a barrister for them. He says in the interview that they don't actually know why they're suing. They have this vague idea, but they need to actually get people like to sign up with the lawsuit and talk to them before they can actually, come up with that. They had this vague overarching idea for the class action lawsuit, but nothing specific yet. That's really, really important, because basically the few things that he said that he thought was going on were refuted by an article by The Guardian that I'll put in the video description. So we have a class action lawsuit with a nebulous concept of why they're suing. We have 1,000 people that are suing. This number keeps on coming up. You'll see Glinner posting this. It's a solid touchstone for them to say 1,000 families are suing. Watch this interview. The head of the class action lawsuit firm said, we don't actually know how many. That's our estimate. So we're already stretching the truth. Like it's a stretched truth in order to make, this sort of trans conversion therapy myth going on at the Tavistock Clinic. With that said, let's talk about the Tavistock Clinic really quick. The Tavistock Clinic is a clinic in the UK. It's actually been closed for reform. They've actually split it up into regional areas to better serve the populace. They had a massive spike in referrals from 2015 to 2016. They went from 678 to 1,408. And then in 2010, they just had 77. And in 2019, 2020, they had 2,728. So they're just like incredibly overtaxed, and they've moved to a regional model to better serve the populace, which is really, really good. With that came a much bigger sample size of children that were suffering from gender dysphoria, including a much greater percentage of children that were neuroatypical, and that includes autistic children. What the challenge was for the clinicians at GIDS was to talk to kids about their gender dysphoria, keeping in mind that while gender dysphoria is a very, very real thing, you can experience gender dysphoria without being trans necessarily. GIDS was put in a very difficult place. They were understaffed. They had, this massive influx of referrals, and they were seeing a much more complicated landscape in terms of the references that they were getting there. They knew that with all these new horizons and complications of children's sort of mental health and psychology and outside factors such as like trauma, bullying at school, family stuff, that to get to the root of the diagnosis of the gender dysphoria and to find the causes was going to take a lot of work and a lot of talking and a lot of various means of non-medical intervention. To put this in perspective in terms of like the medical transitioning, which I think is a big part of Glinner and the rest of the transphobes argument, that people were forced onto puberty blockers and stuff like that. In 2019 and 2020, only 16% of those 2,700 people were actually referred to the endocrine department for puberty blockers or some form of medical transition beginning kind of thing. Of that 16%, 95% went on to that because, they probably really wanted to, and they'd been through an incredibly rigorous form of testing and stuff like that before they came to that point. In talking to trans people and in reading this Guardian article, my takeaway was that nothing about GIDS or the Tavistock Clinic was rapid fire. It would take like 3 years for people to get in at all sometimes. When you got in, the process was in some cases maddeningly slow. There was actually a lot of anger from people that I talked to about how slow the process went. We're talking about...
Which there would be because they're puberty blockers, and so if it takes upwards of 6 months to a year, you might start puberty.
Appointments being like 4 to 6 weeks apart, and because people had spent so long waiting to get in, a lot of these kids had socially transitioned. They had chosen their new name. They were presenting as their gender. They would get to the clinic and be like, all right, look, I've done all this, I'm ready to go, give me hormones. And they would be like, no, we still need to talk to you and really make sure that this is the right thing to do. Methodical, careful, and empathetic. These are the things that I got as an impression from reading the Guardian article, which has lots and lots of quotes from clinicians there. One thing you'll hear the transphobes crow about is the nature of the care at GIDS, and that is that it is gender affirming or, sort of like fast tracking these kids towards transitioning. That's not what gender affirming care is at all. Let me read you a quote here. For me, affirmative care is starting from a stance that says gender...
I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because we know all of this. This is J.K. Rowling, Graham Linham. We know what that means. Let's get to the fallout.
Anytime soon unless there's an intervention. The public response to Christian's tweet was pretty unanimous and swift. Musicians and composers and producers who are, up to speed on trans rights all condemned it pretty heavily. There was a very, very strong outcry against what he had said. There was also this other side of like bots or like weird puppet accounts that got spun up that were all like making up a hashtag that said I stand.
The video's not rambling. This is addressed to a general audience. Like, we've gone over this. Not everybody has.
With Christian Henson, it was like instantaneous. It was really, really strange. And none of those people were musicians or producers or anything. So it was a very kind of disturbing peek into the machine that occurs around this kind of material. Soon after that happened, Christian privated his Twitter account, and a week later, the CEO of Spitfire, Will Evans, put out this statement. Christian's tweet has caused hurt amongst our community. This hurt is understandably being extended as a reflection on Spitfire Audio, its collaborators, and its employees. I'm deeply sorry for that. We've worked hard to be a beacon for the industry and have a responsibility to do better. Christian's views are his own, and as a company, we're committed to building an inclusive environment for our employees, collaborators, and customers. Christian's going to take a break as we reflect on how to move forward, and in the meantime, please accept my apologies on behalf of Spitfire Audio. Everybody kind of was like, well, okay, this kind of sucks. This isn't enough. We really need to hear from Christian Henson on, a reversal of his views, an apology, some sign that he's going to, learn something from this and educate himself to the point where he doesn't follow these transphobic conspiracy theories. Instead,
that's a hard sell. And the reason why it's a hard sell is not because they aren't transphobic conspiracy theories, but because these are not so much Linham, but is it Linnehan? Linnehan? Well, that's weird. I guess that's why it's Glinner. That makes sense. Well, like J.K. Rowling is a mainstream figure, very mainstream, and so like that characterization is true, but then you make that proposition, and a general audience that is not going to be paying attention to this, maybe is not paying attention to this, might actually jump in defense of the other person. Because they might think it's like, they might not actually see what's going on. They might not see that this is someone who is jumping on board with somebody using their immense fame and influence to fearmonger against an entire community of people that are already embattled. And their voices get drowned out and erased in the process. They don't get to give their account. They are simply never heard. But people freak out. They respond to this. Policy shifts without the input of this minority that actually needs it. And things get a little or a lot worse depending on who you are. But there's a flip side to this, and that's that the nature of that fame means there is a shortcut to this person getting the sympathy of everybody around them, people who would never even have heard about this until she or until whoever it is that delivers an account of it with their framing. So it's tricky. It's tricky.
And what happened was Christian just kind of silently slurped his way back into Spitfire and normalcy. He's working there now in his previous capacity. He's taken over Piano Book, and he's still on YouTube doing his YouTube channel where he is now working in sort of thinly veiled transphobic dog whistles. He's learned nothing. He's apologized for nothing. Nothing has changed, and it sucks. So once this tweet went out, Piano Book, the Discord for Piano Book, saw a flood of new users. These users were all primarily sort of these transphobic puppet accounts getting in there and sort of just asking questions and hashtagging I stand with Christian Henson. The public statement that Spitfire put out, the one I just read you, got a ton of traffic from people telling Spitfire they were angry at them for putting Christian Henson on a break. None of these people were musicians. None of these people were producers. These were all people who wanted to further this sort of concept that turfdom and transphobia were the normal thing, and that this was sort of cancel culture that was being applied to Christian. It was really weird and disturbing to see. I actually reached out to my contact at Spitfire to try to explain to them that what they were seeing in their replies wasn't really indicative of how the real world felt about trans rights. I don't know if they understood that or not, but I had to try. I learned by talking to my contacts at Piano Book and Spitfire that the brand manager that was employed by Spitfire to manage Piano Book had specifically sought out diverse individuals to moderate the Discord. These are the people that were at the forefront of the transphobic wave that came in that day. And unfortunately, it turns out that one of the users who infiltrated the Piano Book Discord that day was none other than Graham Linehan. On a post on his blog, Graham goes into detail on how he infiltrated the Piano Book Discord to vouch for Henson and spread transphobic rhetoric. In the post, The Real Revenge of the Nerds, he purposely misgenders Harriet Ford, a Piano Book Discord moderator, and then proceeds to go into a one-sided account of the events as they unfolded, until Harriet booted him from the server.
Graham Linehan is a bizarre, too despicable to be a tragic figure. He's sort of crossed the line into comedy. This is a man who had fame, a family, and lost it all just because of his obsessive hatred for trans people in particular. It's very bizarre. And this is creepy juvenile behavior.
From there, he took to Twitter to continue the, quote, conversation, using the kind of language he's become well known for, including calling upon the boogeymen of, quote, cancel culture as the reason he was banned from the Piano Book Discord. You can see in this article a small taste of what the volunteer crew had to deal with after Christian's tweet. Because of this, Harriet and other mods left the Piano Book Discord and still remain pretty traumatized by the event. I understand that, Harriet doesn't really even feel compelled to make music anymore. Another Piano Book moderator has a great write-up on her blog, which I'll link to below, but let me read you a little bit from it. This is from composer Gemma Hooper. Christian Henson, one of the co-founders of Piano Book and Spitfire Audio, was a person I have looked up to for his approach towards making music, recording, and composing a more inclusive, more democratized platform. He is one of the admins on the Piano Book site. His YouTube channel has lots of useful industry information and observations. He seemed committed to inclusivity until the tweet on September 6th, 2022. As of December, Henson was actively working on projects at Spitfire Audio again and with Piano Book Discord admins without further comment from Spitfire Audio, other than a note of support for the trans community from another Spitfire Audio employee who was also an admin of the Discord. That individual left the Piano Book server not long after Henson's return. During the initial days after the Henson tweet, a large number of transphobes came into the Piano Book Discord to voice their support for Christian Henson's stance and engage in persistent sea-lining. So this is a form of trolling where they just
So here's, I'm going to go back a little bit. So here's, there's a mistake that's being made. And it's subtle, but it's important. This person is complaining about, let's see, a large number of transphobes came to the Piano Book Discord to voice their support for Christian Henson's stance and engaged in persistent sea-lining in spite of server rules against hate speech. Now, political discourse, that's a little bit more complicated. If they have a ban against any political discourse, as a lot of media servers have, just because it introduces schisms into a community that's there for fandom or something, or to do something productive in collaboration, that makes sense. But the hate speech one is tricky. When we're talking about things like slurs, or we're talking about things like statements that are disparaging of a community of people, that's easy to point out to a layperson and say look, see, that's a bigoted statement, right? Sea-lining requires interpretation. So how sea-lining works is you essentially just ask questions. And it seems innocent enough, but you ask questions that have been responded to. And the goal is to simply exhaust the person you're talking about, you're talking to. And it's called, and you're asking questions where the failure to answer provides, basically the goal is to just exhaust you and then to get you to slip. You're asking over and over and over again, hey, but then what about this? But then what about this? But what about this? And the questions are of a sort where they signal to a knowing person, presumably the one you're asking, that you're disingenuous. But to an uninformed observer, they don't see that. And so you get angry and you get upset and you get frustrated and you respond appropriately to someone who's being disingenuous, but the people around you don't know that. And the result is you look silly. Maybe even the correct position looks silly. Why? Because you haven't actually been debated with. You've been essentially gaslit by someone who is pretending to be an interlocutor, but in fact is not. You've been goaded. You've been goaded using a transparently to you false presentation of a conversation, whereas other people, they don't know the difference. The problem here is that to other people, similarly, the notion of sea-lining as something that people are capable of recognizing as what it is, that's not going to be obvious. People are going to look at this and go, well, hang on, are you sure that's what they were doing? Maybe they were just asking questions, right? Possibility. We make judgment calls about things like this all the time in life. But when it's abstract like this, it becomes very easy to sort of play hard and fast with not hard, it's easier to play rigidly with the rules, because there isn't the same reliance on intuitions and experience when it's abstract like that. And it's very easy to overblow, for example, the possibility that you're wrong when it may in fact be the case that based upon your experience, it's actually overwhelmingly likely you were fully justified in making the inference. No, somebody wouldn't act like this under these circumstances. And maybe you even have tools for kind of prodding and figuring that out. But this kind of public statement is not going to get the reception you need. Same with concern trolling, same deal. It's like, maybe they are really just concerned. Some people are. That's the whole idea behind concern trolling. It's an attempt to present yourself falsely as someone who actually does care, but there are actually people who care. So is it a lie, or are you making an inference rashly? In which case you still look weaker. Because if you make an inference rashly here, well, maybe you have elsewhere also.
Employee who was also an admin of the Discord. That individual left the Piano Book server not long after Henson's return. During the initial days after the Henson tweet, a large number of transphobes came into the Piano Book Discord to voice their support for Christian Henson's stance and engage in persistent sea lioning. So this is a form of trolling where they just like perpetually debate and never actually hear anything. You know, like a sea lion on a dog is like, "Or."
What's this? Been watching you since your mold dig video. You mean my mold dig videos as a user of Spitfire Audio? F. You tried to engage regarding this. Your community is very exclusive to people to the point of not answering simple questions. Wish you the best, but still trying to wrap my mind around this. Not sure what you're getting at there, fake name.
It's like that. It's meant to.
If you want to come on and say hi, be my guest.
Lost the other side because there will never be a resolution or any sort of like eye to eye. It's just meant to wear you down. I feel like I'm in a position where I have no choice but to show solidarity for the harm done to the other mods and trans members of the Piano Book Discord and to leave the community. I sincerely hope that this post is seen as a mark of a professional industry participant with personal integrity rather than as a wave-making source of trouble. However, time will tell. On the flip side, I hope that Mr. Henson comes to an awareness of the lack of personal and professional integrity he has shown throughout this troubled period of Piano Book and Spitfire Audio's history, and does his best to make amends with compensation for those targeted by Leinen and his transphobic supporters. I'll add this as a final note here, that a lot of the people I talked to regarding this were like legitimately scared of what...
Red Hand, are you trolling me with the name pronunciation? It's Leinhen. You said Leinen. You're saying it's Linehan?
Was going to do to their careers, and a lot of them can't speak out because of the libel laws in the UK. Rowling has already been using her team of lawyers to basically take apart anybody who speaks of her turfdom on Twitter. There's been some pretty disturbing tweet threads going around on it. People are basically mummed; they can't talk about it, and this is creating a really, really terrible environment for those involved. Next up, I'd like to talk to you about Katie Alice. Her artist alias is Skyscape Paradise. She is a multimedia artist, a musician, a composer, a sample artist, and she has made content for Piano Book. In talking to other Piano Book members, I was pointed towards her and reached out to talk to her about her situation because it transected brutally with Henson's transphobic coming out party. Katie chose Evergreen College here in Washington State for its rich history in feminism and grunge, inspired by the Riot Girl bands like Bikini Kill and Sleater-Kinney. She was also attracted to the college's collection of recording equipment. She began the Evergreen Sampling Project for Piano Book, capturing unique instruments to share with the community. Her work was so notable that it caught the attention of Henson himself, who invited her to his YouTube for a chat. She also worked with composer and friend of Henson's, Stephen Talmy, on a special song for Henson's birthday. Stephen, if you're watching, your pronouns in your bio, they're not really doing enough heavy lifting for the chumminess that you're showing with Henson right now. You got to do better. Her dedication and aptitude for making sampled instruments eventually led to her being commissioned for a Piano Book artist feature instrument that would be sold through the Piano Book and Spitfire website. Working closely with friends in the Olympian music scene, she eventually created Gaze.
Linehan?
An entire shoegaze band in a sample library, including guitars, bass, a drum set, and a collection of reamped synthesizers and presets. It's really hard to overstate like how much Katie put into this, how much love and labor she put into this. Everything about this was like something that she was so excited about. She was excited that she was working in a genre that she loved. She was excited that she was working in her community locally. She was excited that she was working for a company that, you know, promoted diversity and inclusivity and democratization of musical tools. It was a win-win. And then a few days before Gaze was released, Christian Henson went and tweeted a tweet that aligned him with two of the most vitriolic transphobes of our generation. And I haven't mentioned this yet, but Katie is trans. The sense I got from talking to Katie was one of primarily sadness and confusion. She didn't understand why Christian would go and destroy the community he worked so hard to build. She didn't know what to do with the project she had worked on. Promoting her work for Piano Book now became a minefield, with pride in her work now becoming clouded by the hatred of the company's co-founder. This is what I wanted to make this video about. These are the kinds of stories that need to get out here. And in part, I'm actually speaking to Christian directly through this video because I want him to know that his actions have consequences. I want him to know that he has hurt people. And I want him to know that an entire global community of people now doesn't know what to do with Spitfire's products or piano.
Yeah, the problem with that appeal is that people like that consider people like the aforementioned as being essentially diseased, so they don't have empathy that way. They have contempt for the notion that they should entertain this. I think the point that is interesting that's being pointed to here, though, is this now puts the company itself at existential, not just ideological odds with people who are working in it, and forces them to be complicit insofar as they're using that service or working for the company providing that service or those services in their own erasure, that of people they care about. That's not good. And you have to find a way to square that with, well, this particular person, this particular place. I mean, clearly, should have the freedom to have these opinions, right? At no point does the word responsibility factor into any of this, which is interesting. You can have a leadership position with no responsibility whatsoever to your company, to its image, to the people who work around you, There is simply the political calculation on the part of your higher-ups or the board or whatever, that you are an optical liability given the response, and then you're given a pat on the wrist. But clearly there's more to it than that. There's more at stake than simply the success of the company itself. There's the actual damage, and it is actual damage that statements like this and bandwagoning like this against communities of people who are a part of your company and who your company serves. And so you're in a fundamental tension, absolute freedom of expression when it comes to these things with no responsibility, or a perverse situation in which responsibility comes to be a shorthand way of justifying virtually any and all censorship, which has also occurred. So it's a difficult needle to thread. I think what's kind of interesting here is what's sort of laid bare, the idea that simply because an institution is private means that therefore harm that it does, even at a grand sociological level, because this does arguably. There are people who just have contempt for that community as a whole. So that doesn't really track, but suppose it was about a racial minority group, and these statements had to do with IQ ceilings or things like that. That's a thing that's made the rounds too. It's a bit more easy to see the dire results of that kind of thing taking hold, and people using celebrity to spread that kind of message. That's what facilitates that message spreading effectively. That's the paradox of liberalism. You're simultaneously all in this together, but can't do anything about it.
Piano Book or any of this, an entire global community that found joy in labs and Spitfire and Piano Book, they don't know what to do with these tools anymore. And many younger and poorer composers, especially composers from less economically developed countries, they really relied on this stuff, and now they don't really know what to do. It's spoiled for them. It's all spoiled.
Venus theory.
This next part is about Cameron, aka Venus Theory. You may know him from his YouTube channel. You've probably encountered some of his virtual instrument presets or sampled instruments. He's a prolific sound designer, and his path intersected with Piano Book. You have to understand that Spitfire is considered like top tier for people that want to make sampled instruments. Getting in and working for Spitfire is a dream for many people, Cameron included. Once he discovered Piano Book, Cameron did a video for his YouTube channel on the platform, which led to a lot of traffic and new users to Piano Book. He became involved with making content for Piano Book and was featured as a samplist of the month in June 2022. This got Spitfire's eyes on him, and it led him to creating an exclusive free library for Piano Book, which is in the top 5 most downloaded of all the site. A video he made for that on his YouTube channel drove even more users to the platform. It was clear that Cameron's work was valued by Piano Book, Spitfire, and the community, and in turn, Cameron was excited to be working with one of the most prestigious sampled instrument creators in the world. The next step in Cameron's journey was Foghorn, a Spitfire Labs plugin. He did this work for free, and it led to discussions of potentially releasing a Piano Book artist library like Katie's Gaze we mentioned earlier. This was going to be a paid product and even may have been Piano Book's flagship product of 2023. So things were looking great for Cameron. He was contributing to a community he believed in. He was making really high quality, cool stuff. And Spitfire had noticed him, and he was actually kind of working his way up into something that was a dream for him. And then Christian Henson tweeted. At that point, Cameron couldn't in good conscience continue to work with Spitfire and Piano Book. He walked away from that project, which would have, again, have been a really big deal for him. And I believe he's also taken down his other stuff from Piano Book. He was really, really on the fence of that because on one hand, it's really, really bad to support this platform with Henson in charge of it, especially since Henson's made no attempts to sort of fix the problem that he created. On the other hand, you have to understand that Piano Book was about democratizing these tools. It was a community. It was about giving these things to people to use to make music to express themselves.
That's an interesting language. That is interesting language. There are two competing senses of democracy that we frequently contend with. One is one based upon exclusion, and one is one based upon indifference. So the one based upon exclusion is the one that emphasizes you are part of a community if you are a citizen as opposed to someone who is not. The other one is based on exclusion. That is, a democratic process is simply one that has sort of open-ended involvement. And so it's totally inclusive, but it's also indifferent. And you can see examples of this type of thinking when pro-democracy libertarians say, are willing to refer all allocation of resources or all reallocation of resources to market dynamics. They have faith in a self-selection of the worthy or the choosing or whatever to take what they need, and they are indifferent to those who don't. The flaws in that are manifold, principally because, one, it conditions you to a kind of blindness to systemic issues that even if you remain indifferent, may come to bite you in the ass later on. Because if it is the case that for whatever reason, those who need either do not or cannot take what they need through the proper routes, that doesn't mean they therefore will not take it by some other means, or that their failure to acquire that won't cost you in other ways down the line. Similarly here, this all seems like rather petty on one level. Oh, like some person in this company who has like a high status tweeted out sympathy with bigots against some subset of the community. And that's bad. We'll just label that bad as is. But the democratic principle might go one of two ways. You might say, this is supposed to be a democratic thing. Why on earth are bigwigs in this company jumping in to go after major parts of our client base and people who work in an organization? These people are also ours. They're a part of our community. We should not be alienating them. But there's another one, which goes, well, it's a democracy. Therefore, he can do what he wants. He's just talking. He's just giving his opinion, right? He should be allowed to do so, obviously. And if other people don't like this, well, they don't have to work here. They don't have to avail themselves of our products or whatever. And you have a democratic principle again, but one of indifference as opposed to one of exclusion. In the first case, it's the exclusivity of those who are in some way connected to the company that makes the fact of their being incidentally targeted the problematic. And the other, it's not problematic at all, because there's a democratic principle of choice that wipes away all sins or something. It makes everything magically better. And what you're up against here is, because all of this hinges on a tweet, and you have to be careful because it being a tweet doesn't actually make it petty. This could have been a public declaration on a podium. It probably would have reached fewer people then. But we have a tendency to kind of downgrade it. But because it's a tweet, people are going to say, well, it's just one guy giving his opinion. What's the problem? You don't agree with him? You bothers you that much? You don't have to use this. That preserves the community in abstract, while allowing the breakdown of the community in the concrete, right? Because the actual community remains fractured, and it's this abstract notion of the community as that which volunteers, in theory, to engage, that allows you to kind of ignore the actual concrete fracturing of that community. So it's touching on some actually very interesting things, but I don't think this is going to make much of a difference, unfortunately, just because of that insurmountable, the insurmountable aesthetics of that logic.
And by removing access that goes against everything the whole thing was about. So this fucking sucks. It sucks for Cameron. It sucks for everybody else involved. Like, it just sucks really, really hard. And with all that sucking under the belt, I guess let's get to the conclusion here. The gender politics debate is, across the world, a major issue for many. Trans rights are coming under attack everywhere, especially as a popular wedge issue that has proven to mobilize conservative voters. In Scotland right now, it's even more tumultuous. They have a left-wing government majority, which is pushing through legislation currently to make it easier for people to legally change their gender.
So, look, you wanna talk about like the lies of the trans agenda? Look at the sign here. I'm person just like you. Excuse me. You're not a person. You're a sign.
Scotland right now, quote, women's only spaces leading to violence against cis women. There's also fear that children are being groomed to be trans, be it by drag queens reading books at the library, gender-affirming care, or even just something as innocuous as listening to a child and providing empathy and guidance. These are the fears that are being stoked by people like Glinner and Rowling and countless others who have made regressing trans rights part of their life's work. It's hard to tell sometimes if the people who stoke these fires actually believe the lies they spread, but it doesn't really matter. In the end, the result's the same. The rights of trans people are eroded, they lose the ability to receive gender-affirming care, which can lead to gender dysphoria, and that can lead to depression, and in some cases, suicide. They lose inclusive spaces, of which the creative community is a huge one. I know so many amazing trans musicians, both from the past and now. I cannot imagine a creative space without them.
Or did that speed up for a second there?
Same goes for Eurorack. Like, if anybody knows anything, they know that...
Oh, I see. So if I hold down the mouse, it speeds up.
The Eurorack scene would be nothing without trans makers. So, like, how are you going to be in this space and be transphobic? It is batshit to me. But that said, I understand how trauma...
I was having too much fun with that.
...can open a void in you. I understand how when something terrible happens, you can hurt so much that you want anything to take that pain away. You want anything to regain control of your life. Trauma and fear can do this to you. Unfortunately, people like Glinner and Peterson know that that happens to people, and they are right there waiting for you. They will give you an answer. They will give you something to take the pain away, but it will be at the expense of other people. It will give you something to point at and say, that's the enemy. That's what's giving me pain right there. But it's not real, and it won't fix you. There is no sinister trans agenda, except for to maybe like make cool music and kick ass. Trans people are people. They're trying to work through their own issues and feelings and human emotions and hurt to come out the other side and be a better person, just like everyone should be. And hopefully everybody is. I don't really know how to fix Spitfire at this point. I think it would probably start with an apology. When Mr. Bill, a really, talented and high-profile producer on YouTube, tweeted something that was sort of turfish, he reacted by taking down his Twitter and taking like a week or two to educate himself. And when he came back, He was like, oh yeah, that was bullshit. That was not true. And now I understand better. He educated himself. And this information is there. Everything, Christian, that
I don't know anything about that, but that's pretty cool if he did.
if you're watching, that you have sort of aligned yourself with has been disproven again and again by tons of people in tons of media in tons of ways. I will put some links in the video description, but I don't think you're going to listen to me. I think that if you...
Actually, unfortunately, we're going to listen to you some more. So this is the one that this stream is actually named after. This is your Synthesizer's Trans and Other Stories. This is the one that's interesting, apparently. Oh, Wendy Carlos. Someone mentioned Wendy Carlos earlier. There we go. Look at that. Yeah. Yeah. This is how the trans agenda has infiltrated music, by giving you music. Those bastards.
Someone's at the door.
What are you, a fucking liberal?
Hello. Hello, sir. Do you have a moment to talk about the agenda? What agenda is that? The trans agenda. Oh no!
Oh my god, it's like Ginger Mr. Girl. Look, you can't unsee it. It's the same.
What's that? What is it? Oh, nothing.
This is like the good Mr. Girl. At Ragnarok they will fight.
Got a little something behind your ear. Really? Can you get it? Here, let me get it real quick. Look at that. What is it? It's the trans agenda. That's right, folks. Today, we're talking about the trans agenda. By the end of this video, your synthesizers, your computers, your telephones, your music, your TV, your movies, they're all going to be transgender. We're going to trans everything that you've ever loved, and we're going to do it fabulously. It's Pride Month. I'm a big gay. I'm not trans. I'm just a big gay. A big cis gay. And I thought it'd be really, really good to do a video about some really influential and special transgender makers and musicians and people that have contributed to this scene, the part of the world that I inhabit, that you probably inhabit.
I like when people try to be funny on YouTube and are successful. I'm not laughing, but I am enjoying this.
You know, this scene of music and technology and making stuff, video, multimedia, all that stuff that we're really, really into. Synthesizers, you know, I guess probably you're into synthesizers if you're here. Some of you are thinking right now, wow, when did this channel get fucking political? I can't believe that Jeremy now has the audacity to mention that an entire group of people exist and are worth celebrating in some way. That's fucking crazy. And some of you are probably thinking, oh wow, he's never even like said anything political or sung anything political, so he shouldn't be able to do this and he should just make OP1 videos until he dies. Well, checkmate, motherfuckers. I actually did sing about politics. What are you going to do now? You're going to shut the fuck up. That's what you're going to do. We are living in some really wild times right now. There's a lot of stuff going on for a lot of people. But specifically...
it's kind of soy. What about this is soy? This is like... This is not soy.
Transgender people are under...
This is confident and loopy in the best way.
Attack worldwide. There are bills going through in a lot of the states here in the US that are made to strip transgender people of their rights to exist, to receive the kind of care that would help them mentally and physically. A lot of it is done under the pretense of saving the children. It's
also, we have 69 concurrent viewers. Can we get 69 likes exactly? No more, no less.
Really big across the pond on what we like to call Turf Island, aka the United Kingdom, aka you were once part of the European Union, but you fucked that up, so why don't you shut the fuck up?
It's trans wow, exactly.
Also, you guys have J.K. Rowling and what's that guy's name? The wifeless guy. Glinner? Is that his name? Yeah, the guy that doesn't have a wife. When I did a video about Spitfire Audio, who still has a transphobic co-owner, by the way, Glinner tried to come after me by telling everyone that I was a gay furry, like he had dug up some big secret. He's just such a fucking Sherlock Holmes, that wifeless man. We live in a time where transphobia is like the hot thing to do. Everyone wants to do a little transphobia as a treat. I'm like, why don't we not do that? Why don't we do the opposite of that? Why don't we
Oh god, he released a book 2 days ago. How I Made and Lost a Career in Comedy. I'm morbidly curious. Maybe I'll look at that someday, briefly.
Recognize and celebrate some trans people who have had a influence on the things that we make
Hey, Zaneki, Zanakil, thanks for the membership. Appreciate it.
and do and consume in a positive way. That's
Now
what
you can watch Mist VODs and use the brand new emotes that I have been furiously plugging in.
doing today. I would love for you to come with me. I think this is a really cool subject, and I think that supporting trans creators right now more than ever is probably a really great thing that we can do individually for a lot of different reasons. Yeah, until the world stops being a fucking insane piece of shit, we're gonna have to try a little extra hard to make sure that marginalized groups don't just get completely eradicated. We're gonna start off with one of the most famous of all, and that is Wendy fucking Carlos. Wendy fucking Carlos is a pioneer of electronic music. She has had an amazing career, and it all started when she graduated from Columbia University with a degree in music composition. She actually worked with Leonard Bernstein in presenting a night of electronic music at the Philharmonic Hall, which is pretty damn cool. She then worked as a recording and mastering engineer at Gotham Records in New York City, and she partnered with Moog, the Moog, it's pronounced Moog, and gave extensive technical advice on what became the first Moog synthesizers. So Carlos was right there, you know, this is what we should do, here it is. So first thing we're transing today is your Moog synthesizers. Your Moogs are trans. Moog actually credits Carlos with
No, that's incorrect. The Moogs are infected with the trans virus. The Moogs themselves are not trans, as they lack a gender and a sexuality entirely.
Originating many of the features of his synthesizers. All right, so Wendy is like, yo, let me help invent the Moog. And then she goes and she records Switched on Bach.
This is like the trans equivalent of the corruption from Dead Space.
Which is kind of a huge deal. This album was like a collection of Bach tracks, Bach compositions done with Moogs. And if you haven't heard it, you should check it out. It's kind of a historic event then. In 1971, a little-known director by the name of Stanley Kubrick works with Carlos on the soundtrack for a
It's not actually the Stanley Parable.
little-known movie. You may have heard of it, called A Clockwork Orange. I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty damn cool. The soundtrack's really, really interesting. And, of course, the movie is a, certified hood classic. In 1973...
I, to this day, have not seen A Clockwork Orange. And you do that this week.
She drops Switched on Bach 2, Electric Boogaloo. It's more Bach on Moogs. What more do you want? This is kind of interesting. I did not know this. Apparently, Carlos actually recorded an entire score for The Shining. Kubrick's The Shining in 1980. I read that first. I was like, Carlos made a score for The Shining. I don't remember hearing Carlos's music in The Shining. Well, it turns out Kubrick went with the guide tracks that the editor had used when editing the movie. So went with a bunch of stuff from avant-garde composers instead. I think you can get Carlos's Shining soundtrack these days, but at the time, I mean, that's a pretty shitty thing to do, Kubrick, honestly. Then,
not the shittiest thing he did in the production of The Shining, if you look into it. That poor woman, the actress who played the wife, wasn't pretty.
1992, Carlos
nasty human being.
drops the soundtrack for Tron. That's right, Tron 1. Carlos did the soundtrack. So, Disney's trans? This is a funny one. Apparently, she collaborated with Weird Al Yankovic on a parody version of Peter and the Wolf, which is just surreal. What the fuck? And then in 2000, she released Switched on Bach 3, this time with digital instruments. So that's worth checking out as well. And in case that wasn't enough for you, Carlos is also the first transgender recipient of a Grammy Award. What have we trans so far? We transed horror movies, we transed Moog synthesizers, and we transed Weird Al Yankovic. Oh, and Prokofiev? Yeah, because Peter and the Wolf. The trans agenda is steamrolling right on through history.
And you trans Stanley Kubrick as well.
Just like we planned. This next one is very special to me, and that is Émilie Gillette. I hope I am pronouncing that right. Émilie Gillette, the founder and sole designer outside the panels and layout of mutable instruments. Quite possibly the most influential outside of Dope.
How do synthesizers work? Hang on.
you know.
Once designers had the new micro-components, they could begin to think of new things to do with them.
A synthesizer is a musical instrument, but because it's a very modern electronic musical instrument using lots of high technology, it gives us so much more control over the sound than we've ever had with any other previous musical instrument. The first requisite of any musical instrument is that it has to have something to make a sound. And the synthesizer has a part that vibrates, but electronically, so you can't actually see it moving like you can see the string of a guitar or the reed of a clarinet, but it does vibrate electronically, and it's called an oscillator.
The oscillator is an electrical circuit which produces regular signals. Oscillators can produce signals of different shapes. The different shapes can produce different types of sounds. The oscillator is connected to a keyboard. The keys trigger signals of different frequencies, different musical notes. What happens next?
The sound passes along the audio chain from the oscillator into the filter. And there we can modify the sound by softening off those sharp points on the oscilloscope. And the softer it becomes, so the softer we hear the tone.
The filter is another electrical circuit. It changes the shape of the signals, and that changes the tone.
The final stage in the audio chain is called an amplifier. And this determines the amplitude of the sound wave, or how big it is. And the bigger it is, the more of it we hear, so it's like a volume control.
So between them, the electrical circuits produce and shape the electrical signals.
Okay, we get the idea.
Eurorack manufacturer. So she was working in the field of like signal processing and machine learning for companies like Google and Last.fm, doing things like audio information extraction on DSP platforms, stuff like that. She got an Arduino in like 2009, and her first project was the Shruti digital hybrid desktop synthesizer. So Mutable Instruments actually started as a desktop synth company, starting with the Shruti, which became so popular as a DIY kit, she had to set up a company to handle the taxes and stuff. And there was Mutable Instruments. It was born. There it was. So I think they had 3 DIY kits. At this point, Emily was like, yo, the support for this DIY stuff kind of sucks ass. So she was like, I want to do something different. I want to make something that is beautiful, and I want to make it open source. She was looking around at what a lot of these companies were doing at the time, and was apparently a little turned off by this sort of like, you know, magic behind the scenes stuff that these devices were doing at the company.
I think I read about this in the book Electronic Brains about the history of computers once. They were invented after someone noticed the humming coming from old vac tube amplifiers. Interesting.
Were claiming that they were doing. So she started designing Eurorack modules, and the code was open source, and the designs were open source. What this led to is one of the most interesting things in all of Eurorack, or maybe even music technology, I think, and that is people started contributing to the firmwares of these devices, whether or not it's like small changes like locking the tuning knob so that you wouldn't hit it while you were performing, to full rewrites of the firmware, like the Parasites firmware for a number of her devices, which added whole new modes and coaxed out new oscillator models and functionality and effects that just weren't there before, basically giving these modules an incredible life beyond even what Amelie could have possibly imagined. I'd say Emily. I'm just going to cover my bases. If it is Amelie, awesome. These modules are incredibly influential. I keep on coming back to them for inspiration. They have not become like old or outdated or anything like that. One, in part to Amelie's impeccable design when it comes to what she has created, but also because these new firmwares give them so much more value than other modules in the field, which is also why we have all of these third-party clones of Emily's work. Cheaper, smaller versions of the original Mutable stuff. I personally love the original design and find it to be just the right layout for what I want in terms of knob size and all that kind of stuff. But when I started, I was using small Mutable stuff, and it was really, really, really powerful. You've also got her work in things like the Arturia Microfreak Mini Freak, and I believe almost every module that's possible has been ported to VCV Rack for free, which means if you wanted to start getting to know Eurorack, you could start for free with a full set of mutable instruments, modules, and software via VCV Rack, and I think that's amazing. The company Mutable is no longer. She moved on to other things, hopefully great things. I hope she's having a great time with her life. Thank you, Emily. Your impact on my life and others is impossible to overstate. All right, cool. So now Eurorack is trans, in case you didn't know. It always has been. Let's go to one of two Sophies I have on this list. That's right, we've got two Sophies. The first one is Sophie Wilson. Sophie Wilson and Steve Ferber are responsible for the ARM processor architecture. The ARM processor being something that is now ubiquitous across almost every single electronic device that you touch day to day. Phones, tablets, cars, computers, synthesizers. You are touching so much trans gear. Every single time you pick up a phone, it's trans. A lot of your computers are trans. Your cars are trans. It's just the way things are. I didn't make this up. To give you some perspective here, in the first quarter of 2021.
Against the odds, my computer is actually the only thing on my entire desk and behind me that is cis.
The ARM ecosystem shipped 6.7 billion chips. Where do they all go? All these transgender chips, where are they? Are they in your food? Are they in your water? Are they in your butt? The answer is all three. This one is really cool too. Next up is Jamie Faye Fenton. She is a game programmer, probably best known for her 1981 game Gorf. But she's also an originator of glitch art, which is really, really cool. This year, she was chosen to lead the community code version of Synthstrom Audible's Deluge. It's gone open source. People are going to be making all kinds of crazy stuff for it, and Jamie is leading that initiative.
That's cool.
Making sure that code stays dope and that everything is cool, and I could not be happier about that. That's super awesome, and I'm looking.
This makes me think of, there's a modernist composer called Alexander Scriabin, who made a piece of music called Mysterium, that was meant to be played with instruments that had lights on them, and so it was supposed to trigger synesthesia, which is an association between certain sounds or certain like other things like synesthesia, so I guess like a together with aesthetics. So, for example, for me, like I have mental associations that are just sort of automatic. They just occur to me, like with colors and numbers. So, like A is red, B is green, C is yellow, and so on and on it goes. It's consistent. And I've actually, this is going to sound really weird, but I've actually like I've done this with a friend a long while ago. We repeated with the letters all the way through the entire alphabet. And it's been consistent for like 10 years. Now, interesting questions emerge from this, like, is this a quirk of how your brain's wired? Is this because of, like, ingrained associations from the past that you just can't recall, or whatever? But, nonetheless, there are these associations between sounds, images, etc., and other aesthetic experiences. And so he made this music that was supposed to trigger this in some way. And so it was supposed to be, like, music with an additional extra auditory dimension to it or something. I don't know why I'm bringing this up. Just this panel here made me think of that.
Looking forward to seeing what y'all come up with. We've already made Moog trans, but we're going to do it again, and this time with Lisa Belladonna. She is an American composer. She's best known for her work with modular synthesizers and music.
It's anesthesia, not aesthetics. What do you mean? No. Anesthesia means without the aesthetic, right? That's what it means, anesthesia. So without the sensible.
Concrete styles. She is an ambassador to Moog, and she has this thing called the Mothership, which is like, how many is it? 9 Mother 32s, 2 DFAMs, and a matriarch. This thing is absolutely wild. You have to watch some videos of this. Lisa Belladonna is the shit, like 100%. So we are in the musician portion of this conversation, and we're going to start with a highly, highly influential group called 100 Gex and their singer Laura Less. This one's really, really interesting to me because, one, I didn't know that Laura Less was trans, and 2, she specifically talks about using vocal formant technology, or like kind of music technology that lets you shift the vocal formants of your voice to battle her gender dysphoria. I thought that was really, really interesting. And as somebody who has played around with vocal formant shifting to, in some cases, make my voice feel a little bit more deeper, to like have it like have more impact in something like that, or just because I felt like I sounded nasally, or
I just didn't like the sound of my voice.
I understand the power that that can have over taking something so personal to you as your voice and transforming it in such a way that better represents who you are through technology. And I know Laura's not alone in this. I know that a lot of streamers and stuff like that use similar things. I also know that other trans musicians use voice shifting and just like characters sort of to represent different parts of themselves when they are creating art. And I think that's really, really, really cool. This next one's a little bittersweet because this person is no longer with us, and that is Sophie, aka Sophie Xeon, aka the second Sophie I have on this list. Sophie's music is wild.
Oh, yeah, she's the one who, I think she was on vacation or something, and she was standing up on a ledge, look at the moon. She fell down and broke her neck. That was unfortunate.
One album, Oil of Every Pearl's Uninsides. Oil of Every Pearl's Uninsides. This album was Grammy nominated. To describe her, she has been kind of put in the hyperpop genre. I'm not sure if she would have described herself in that way. She synthesized all of her drums, which is really, really interesting. She used a mono machine, electronic mono machine. It was so like forward thinking when she worked with other people as a producer, of which she did, like a bunch of people, Charlie XCX, Madonna, Kim Petras, Vince Staples, like a lot of artists she produced, and you can hear her hallmark sound integrated into what they do. And I think it's just really, really interesting to have this rather untamed, almost clangorous vision of what music can be, and then transmute it through the lens of pop, especially working with people like Charlie XCX and Kim Petras. Highly, highly, highly influential. You start getting into the realm of the PC music label, you know, connections to 100 gex, all these connections to this like movement of music. This stuff helped redefine what I guess pop music could be, and started a whole new conversation going forward about like, well, what can we do? What can we get away with? How do we transmute this thing into something new and put our identities into it? This is an interesting segue here in that in 2023, this artist who we're going to talk about next, Kim Petras, she was the first transgender person to win a Grammy in a Best Pop Duo, and she dedicated a large portion of her speech to talking about Sophie as a mentor, as a friend, and I think that's beautiful. So let's talk about Kim Petras. Probably most of you are familiar with her, if and not in any other way, from Sam Smith's collab with her, Unholy. This track that, like, if you've heard it once, it will get stuck in your head. And I don't know, I kind of like all the drama around that song and video. Like, it's just
Why is the tongue coming out of his nose?
ridiculous, people freaking out about this shit. Her debut album is dropping this month, and she's contributed her voice to a bunch of projects. My favorite one...
Wait, is that a tongue or is that a nose ring or something?
Her debut album is dropping this month, and she's contributed her voice to a bunch of projects. My favorite one being Evelyn from the K-pop virtual supergroup KDA, because that means that League of Legends says trans rights. And if we could trans League of Legends, I am totally down with that. We did it. It's done. Kim Petras just made League of Legends trans. We're on our way. Transgender! Let's talk about some content creators, meaning people that make stuff on YouTube specifically. I would be nowhere near as bread-pilled or think I am as smart as I am without transgender creators on YouTube. And I'm just going to shout out the big obvious ones because there's so many. I'll probably do a whole video just on that.
You know, it's funny to think if J.K. Rowling had written just 10 years later, she would have been saying Dumbledore was trans, and who would she be attacking right now instead? Where would we be at? Well, it'd be the non-binary people, wouldn't it? Yeah. Weird how that works.
ContraPoints, Natalie Wynn, and Abigail Thorne as Philosophy Tube. To say that these two broadened my worldview is a severe understatement. About a year before the pandemic started, I discovered Natalie's content and by, algorithmic suggestion, I discovered philosophy too. And they primed me to, right at the beginning of the pandemic when I got fired from my job, basically just like go completely leftist. And I'm so grateful for that because there's so many like bits of nuance that they bring to the table in terms of how these creators talk about the issues that we're all sort of feeling and facing, and give it names and give it classifications and connect it to history and connect it to all of these things.
Well, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Like, it really is like a spirit issue, not a technical issue. Like, I remember being really annoyed at, let's be honest, her lying and saying Dumbledore is gay. And actually, no, Hermione Granger was black, despite like describing her face being white. And the issue was not that it subverted the expectations of the reader, who had assumed certain things about these characters based upon what was considered sort of typical or normal at the time, or what they were comfortable with because of the conditions in which they grew up. What was annoying is that it was clearly her chasing what she thought was the popular option. And you can see where that leads, because now she perceives the popular option is doing the opposite. It's targeting a group. Doesn't really carry. And so despite the fact that she was sort of cynically assuming the form of being this progressive, inclusive, open-minded person, push comes to shove. It just took a few years for push to come to shove. No. She's exactly as small-minded and prejudiced as frothing at the mouth anti-gay marriage people were back leading up to 2010. It's weird to think it's that recent too, isn't it? Weird. Hermione wasn't black. There was a controversy because there was a black actress playing Hermione in the Cursed Child, in a Cursed Child production. People were mad about that.
Things that while you may feel like, yes, I'm having this feeling, I don't know how to describe it. I don't know how.
And she did what I think Stephen King did this too, but he hasn't been. I don't think he's been nearly as bad recently, but I haven't been paying attention. So, because he did the same thing with the Gunslinger, right? Because they did a weird thing with the Gunslinger too. They cast Idris Elba in the role as the Gunslinger, which I don't have an issue with per se. I think he'd be good for the role. The problem, though, is that the anti-white racism on the part of a black character was a critical part of the story, so it was like... It's sort of like, it'd be kind of like if they race swapped the characters in The Help. It's like... You know? Like, if the story didn't involve that in particular, it'd be a little less weird. But you get the point. It's exactly, it's a mask they're putting on. Had that actually been the case, cool. But when they're lying about it, it's like, I don't think you're actually being progressive. I think you're using that as a cloak, and you don't give a shit. And this is going to bite us in the ass later when we allow you to sell yourself this way, and you use that credit to attack somebody else, which is what happened. I don't think she got sick of wearing the progressive mask. I think the progressive mask that she was wearing belonged to a different time. When the threshold was, oh, you're pro the existence of gay people. Literally, like that was a controversy. Oh my God, Dumbledore, this completely asexual in the narrative character, is gay. I mean, like, why? Can you imagine that even being an issue? It's really remarkable. And you have to understand, like, homophobic psychology is really weird. When you're, and like, it's weird to think, especially, like, given who I've developed into, like, the nature of my psychology back when I was growing up under like really conservative conditions, not even oppressive conservative conditions, just like that's the culture. You're raised to have an instinctive response to things like it's diseased. So when when, for example, you see, like, they're probably bogus, but when you hear people cite studies about, like, how how homophobes, like, view gay men making out or something, and they have a similar brain response to maggots, to viewing maggots or something like that. Like, it's a disgust response. I don't know by what methodology they determine this, but I think there's a reason why people find that sort of headline kind of intuitive, because it's similar. And I think a major part of it is that, especially under conditions of extreme systematized homophobia, your only exposure to same-sex relations is going to be through media that depicts it as essentially incestuous and or pedophilic. And so you have additional stuff being layered in, and you're seeing all of this probably before you even hit puberty, because this is suffuse in the media. Similar with trans people. The sexually confused uncle in drag was a stock comedy character in, like, 90s comedy, and you didn't think anything of it. You know, unless you were trans, in which case probably doesn't make you feel too great. So it's like there's reasons why we progress so slowly on these things, and there's a reason why, like, we've also seemingly progressed so quickly, and it's because the relative extremeness of our general cultural bigotry towards these different groups meant that the bare presence of one of them in a piece of media was shocking. Oh my God, Dumbledore is gay? That offended a lot of Christians, leaving aside the fact that it's a story about witchcraft. Same deal, though. We probably had the exact same shift in terms of how we view stories of that nature. I remember I got a copy of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire for my birthday once. And it was the most exciting thing in the world. I loved that book. It's the first one I read. And I got to the middle part with Grindylows, and they're described as water demons. And I tore the page out that had that word in it so I could keep the rest of the book, because I was terrified of my family finding that page and taking it away from me because it had that word demon in it. There were people who were freaked out about Pokemon because there were psychic types in them. You have to understand, like, psychic types, not tykes. That's Earthbound. You have to understand, like, the level of psychosis that we're acculturated into in that space. It's really bizarre. It's like, looking back on it, it's like an alien planet. It's so weird.
How to categorize it or make it real with a name, and I don't have any way to connect to other people about it. These creators did that. They allowed me to connect these feelings and thoughts that I had about the world to movements, to books, to literature, to philosophy, to all of these things, and I didn't feel alone anymore. I was like, holy shit, I get it. Like, this has been something that has been considered and thought about for a while. We still don't have a solution for it yet, but at least we're all thinking about it. And that was an
Damn, that got dark fast. Sorry to go through that. I had a good childhood, okay? That's not the issue. But there were things like that. And people who grew up earlier dealt with worse. Way worse. And it's not my family's fault. They were doing what their culture taught them. Unfortunately, like, we just aren't all that free to choose these things. It takes a lot of education to get free to choose these things in a more or less circumspect way.
Incredibly powerful thing to experience. And since we're talking about ContraPoints and philosophy too, we can't not talk about Zoe Blade, the person who has done all of the music for their videos, for the most part. Zoe, you are an inspiration. Zoe also has a YouTube channel where she talks about modular synthesis and composition techniques, so go check that out if you are interested in it.
She looks like an art teacher I had once.
All right, we're going to wrap up with a sort of grab bag of producers, content creators, and makers. These were all suggested from really nice people on my Patreon. I asked for a list of trans makers and musicians that inspired them, and boy did they deliver. So thank you to my patrons for helping me with this list. First is Emerson M. Mancini. They are a Grammy-winning engineer, having worked with the likes of Lizzo, Kendrick Lamar, John Batiste, Charlie Puth, Hazley, and a ton more. To say that they are talented and prolific is an understatement. Don't understatement. I don't know why I'm doing this. Anyways, they did a video with Native Instruments last year where they, I think they master a track from start to finish. It might be more than that, but definitely check out their work. They are incredibly talented, and they have the awards to prove it. These next two are kind of connected a little bit, and that is Eris Drew and Octa Octa, both really, really amazing producers. Eris Drew runs a label called T4T Love Energy with her partner Octa Octa. They do it from a log cabin in New Hampshire, which I love to death. They were BBC One residents for spring and summer of 2020. Eris does a night in Pittsburgh and also in Berlin. So like,
Your tomfoolery raid?
They're out here doing shit.
I don't know if you'll stick around for very long.
The grind. Next up,
weird
we
stuff
have
tonight.
Joanna Weaponized ASMR Fang. Should I put Weaponized ASMR in quotes? This is how she describes the Foley work that she has done and won awards for. She has done work for The Invisible Man, God of War. She works at PlayStation, Sony. She is the first openly transgender woman to win.
Alright, fools, explain. What is this red head thing? Looks weirdly phallic, actually, on my screen.
Emmy, a primetime Emmy, not just a regular Emmy. I don't know if there's different Emmys, but it specifically says primetime Emmy in my jokes. Yeah, video games are trans now. God of War is trans. Kratos is probably trans.
In fact, you, the audience, are also now trans. Welcome. Sorry, it's just how it is. I don't make the rules.
It's great. The trans agenda is steamrolling through everything that you love. Last but not least, I'd like to give a shout out to Thea Flowers, the sole owner and designer of the company Winterbloom. It's a Eurorack company. I have worked on a video in the past for Thea's module Castor and Pollux, of which there is a new version out right now. It's new and improved. It's a dual Juno oscillator. She is amazing at what she does and deserves all the praise. You should check out her write-up on designing it, too. It's really, really well put together, and I think her manuals are probably some of the best I've ever seen. So shout out to you, Thea. You're the GOAT. We made it to the end of the video. Let's review. What is the trans agenda here for? 1, they are here to make cool shit, make cool music, make cool video games, make cool technology,
make you die. I'm clicking on something else. Hang on. Let's see. We got one more thing to look at tonight because okay. Oh, okay. This is gonna annoy you so much because it annoyed me so much. It's got almost no following. We're picking on a smaller channel right now. That's all. That's all. This was making the rounds in some server somewhere. I don't even remember which one. But this is by Patricia Nonis. Hi, in today's video I have just 3 concepts I believe have the best potential at preventing what I see as rampant and extremely common intellectual. These are empirical claims, semantic analysis, and epistemic contextualism. This is especially relevant but not limited to animal rights and general debating spheres. Nowhere is it needed as much as academia, though where people regularly say shit like animals aren't interested in liberty. Oh, I remember. Vegan stuff. This is a vegan video. This is a vegan who thinks she's smarter than everybody else. This is going to be fun in only 10 minutes. That's going to be great. No evidence given, no data, no animal neuroscience quoted, no footnotes. Not even a nicely written letter. It's beyond embarrassing. A lot of the shit just needs to be taught from primary school on up. It shouldn't even be a choice versus having it as some elective at university level. We're only about 0.1% of the population, I don't know why you have 2 zeros there, of the student population will have the brain power to realize how important it is and learn it. Patricia is a PhD law candidate. Oh, dear Lord. God help us, another lawyer.
So most people may not know it, but they're walking around and talking to others, possessing what is very close to something like an intellectual disability. No judgment on my part. That was pretty much me a few years ago before I got woke on some really basic shit.
Lady, your video is called Basic Concepts to Prevent Intellectual Retardation,
which has increased my quality of thinking in ways I never thought possible. So what I want to go through today is some really fundamental first principles kind of concepts, which should be taught probably from primary school on up. It will seem like common sense at first, and in some ways, I guess it is. But once you actively start using these concepts, you'll see how bad your quality of thinking and everyone else's actually is. So if you've done a bit of philosophy or have a philosophy degree,
See, this person would have benefited from a trans music specialist.
and are across formal logic, etc., obviously this does not apply to you. But if you haven't, it 100%
How do you know someone's a vegan? The gills.
does. I don't care if you've got 3 PhDs, are a child prodigy, a genius, etc. If you haven't done any basic analytical philosophy, you still have that intellectual disability I'm speaking of. So I want to start with empirical claims because it's the most frequent concept I've seen that people fail to grasp and implement properly.
Oh,
An
God.
empirical claim is one that is verifiable by observation or experience.
You cannot complain about sound. Right now, I can complain about sound. This is bad even by my standards.
Rather than theory or pure logic. So most people understand this, but for some reason they only seem to understand something is an empirical claim or question in certain contexts. For example, if I claim that something like, the planets move the way they do due to gravity, most people understand that it's an empirical claim and that the evidence for such a claim is based on scientific studies and data related to astronomy.
No, that's a claim that's amenable to empirical verification. That's not an empirical claim. That's different. Like, suppose gravity as a thing is something that for whatever reason can only be studied indirectly. Well, in this case, like you could empirically test things relating to gravity, but the claim about gravity might be purely speculative. It might not be a thing that actually is amenable to empirical verification. She's just warming up the Liquid Zulu argument, maybe.
But for some strange reason in animal rights circles, this understanding just flies out the window when it comes to topics people get ideological about. Instead, empirical claims are often stated as facts. Here are some examples. Being aggressive is bad for animal rights. X is the best way to advocate for animals. X is the most effective way to defend animals. So these 3 sentences.
Okay, bad for animal rights. That may be a normative claim. That's not necessarily empirical. Effective is empirical because that's saying, hey, it's implying rather, this will generate this result if deployed in the world in time. So that's empirical. That's a thing you can observe. But the first one, this is bad for it, that may be normative. That may be one of those things where it's like, this may work. The thing that you're doing may actually have like empirically useful results. We've observed the same strategy being used elsewhere. This is a thing that we may use for short-term gains, but maybe by the same token, we commit some kind of ethical or we do some kind of violence to the dignity of the thing, or we do some kind of epistemic violence in the course of doing so. Maybe, for example, what's being proposed is that you lie for the sake of animal rights, right? Like, but that may not be an empirical claim. That may be one that is purely normative or some, subdivision of that, like ethical or whatever.
Are 100% empirical claims.
Oh, thank you, Rick Sly, for the 2 gifted memberships. Much appreciated.
Yet they are often stated, embarrassingly I might add, as facts, with no evidence given as to why we should believe the premise. Aggressive debating, discussing, and any form of activism or communication is not bad for anyone just because you feel it is. That's not an argument, it's ideological, self-centered garbage. Other dumb empirical claims can often be heard from anti-natalists, such as, having less people on Earth will reduce suffering.
Well, you got to be a little bit careful there, because bad feelings is in the ballpark of suffering, right? So if you have a principle that suffering is bad and you're relying upon that, well, you have to be... Okay, let's just hear what she says here.
Or, most people have such shitty lives, non-existence is definitely preferable to existence. So the first case is empirically just not true due to wild animal suffering, and the second...
Whoa, hang on, what? Hang on, let's see.
Often be heard from anti-natalists, such as, having less people on Earth will reduce suffering. Or, most people have such shitty lives, non-existence is definitely preferable to existence. So the first case is empirically just not true due to wild animal suffering.
How would that empirically not be true? Like, wild animals still suffer with the presence of humans. So, perhaps the argument is that there would be less destruction of the natural environment, and so there would be more space for animal flourishing, and so the ratio of suffering to flourishing would be different. In which case, there may be less animal suffering on average, because that's typically how we do it. It's by comparison to flourishing, or to pleasant, good things, right? Because technically, if you doubled the population of everything, period, and somehow managed to keep the status quo identical in both cases, all else being equal, you would have more suffering, but you'd have more of the good stuff too. So that's actually not obviously untrue. This is a basic failure in reasoning on her part to assume that.
And the second is simply a wide claim based on little data.
That's true.
As this person surveyed the world entire, we don't even have an accurate unit of measurement for something like that. And it's fucking irritating that people just make this divine claim to knowledge as if it were knowable as the last joint they just smoked.
It also kind of presumes that suffering is the condition of a life not being worth living. And I think that's a different question for different people. In some cases, yeah, maybe there being like a certain degree of suffering means that the life isn't actually worth living at that point, potentially. But then there are other people for whom, despite an immense amount of suffering, they find their lives incredibly worth living. It's a bit more complicated than that.
Not having data or empirics doesn't necessarily mean a dead-end zone for an argument. Far from it. With sentience of animals is an empirical claim which is difficult to prove, but it's the same deal with humans. Consciousness is elusive and mysterious and probably will be for some time. So if people want to try, and be delusional here and say we can't rely on sentience for animals for their moral worth, be prepared to say the same thing about humans.
Hang on, wait.
Want to try, and be delusional here and say we can't rely on sentience for animals for their moral worth, be prepared to say the same thing about humans.
Yeah, but we derive our concept of sentience from our interactions with other humans. We are more ambiguous about organisms with which we can't directly communicate in that way. We can't speak to an orangutan and get insights into their thought process or their self-awareness. We have to make inferences essentially for them. Or to say nothing about like snails or whatnot. There are clearly non-sentient animals that you also care about. Vegan diets don't even permit you to use animal-derived products. It's not just about not killing the animal.
If they're not ready to do that, then you've just walked them straight into a contradiction.
If you're an analytic philosopher and argue life isn't worth living, you've probably had a bad experience of them. I met some analytic philosophers that are worth having around. They are an increasing rarity, I'll grant you that.
And successfully defended your argument without needing substantial data. It gets worse in academia. The amount of shit I've read saying animals are not interested in liberty, they don't have moral agency, animals can't enter contracts.
They can't enter contracts. Most humans can't even enter contracts. Okay, we're going to go back to what I was talking about earlier with the origins of the passport system. The whole liberal idea, the contradiction that simultaneously you need to be able to tacitly consent to your sovereign by being able to stay or leave, but on the flip side, you need to be sure that the people who are leaving, say to work in a colony somewhere, so under the British Empire, they know what they're getting themselves into, they know what the contract they just signed means, and so they have literacy tests and things like that. A part of being able to enter into a contract is being able to understand terms. Otherwise, the contract isn't really a contract. It's a weird, opaque, one-sided Chinese room style thing that somebody engages with, and then a good thing happens, and they don't understand they're in an agreement between two agents. Animals can't do that. That's a complex linguistic thing that you need a more complex language than, let's just say, most animals we are aware of that do communicate in an intelligent fashion do, and intelligent like in a way that we can sort of approximate to how humans communicate. Animals can't enter contracts. Animals with language can enter contracts potentially, but even like that, a contract is a very complex technology. It's not simply given to you just because you have language. I don't know what she's talking about here.
They're all empirical claims and are rarely treated that way. Often their empirical status is not even acknowledged. I'm not even sure the people making the claims...
Hang on, let me go back a little bit.
In academia, the amount of shit I've read saying animals are not interested in liberty, they don't have moral agency, animals can't enter contracts. They're all empirical claims and are rarely treated that way. Often their empirical status is not...
Can't enter contracts. I mean, there's an empirical basis for it, insofar as the conditions of being able to enter into a contract are empirically observable. But I mean, the statement that animals can't enter contracts, insofar as by animal we mean non-human or beast or something, that may be sort of trivially true, just by dint of the definitions of the things involved. If we're talking about if by, for example, animal, we mean non-sentient organism, which we frequently do. Like, think about how, for example, we think of Star Trek, right, with Data. Data's essentially a human character. The complicating factor is his origins, not actually so much the nature of the thing before you in terms of what it does, how it experiences, It is essentially a human. The alienating factor in the rest of humanity is that he has come about by the same means that we make our tools. So there's a tension there between, is this a disposable object that is to be used by humans, or is this a peer that is simply emerged by a mechanism that has an unfortunate that is unfortunately the same one that produces our tools, and so that brings into confusion that way. That can be like an analytic statement. Animals are those things which cannot enter contracts, as sort of like a necessary follow-through from the logic that animals, being not capable of speech in the way humans are, can't engage in the reasoning activities that is a contract, right? Stuff like that.
Not even acknowledged. I'm not even sure the people making the claims who write this stuff are aware that their claims are empirical and thus require evidence and data. Extensive data, I might add, given the seriousness of the claims being made. Quite frankly, it's embarrassing. As thinkers and people interested in bettering the world, we surely must start in bettering our own thinking. And this begins by understanding the logical and mathematical relations in our mind. Making a claim to knowledge and not backing it up with knowledge or evidence, or even being aware the claims you're making need evidence in order to be valid, is intellectual retardation.
I'm going to listen to this one more time.
To knowledge and not backing it up in our mind. Making a claim to knowledge and not backing it up with knowledge or evidence, or even being aware the claims you're making need evidence in order to be valid, is intellectual retardation.
Now, are you going to provide any of the aforementioned to support this statement? I don't think you are. I think you think this stands by itself for some reason, despite everything else you've been saying tonight.
Sorry, I just don't have any other word or name for it that is as accurate as that or does it justice.
Well, it's fallacious reasoning. This is why we talk about it that way, because it's not actually a pathology. It's a deficiency in education. We don't talk about people that way. The fact that you cannot think of a different word, a more appropriate word, in fact, leaving aside the ethical inappropriateness of that, given your context and what you're supposedly doing here, your inability to think of something else speaks to a deficiency in your own creativity and in your own education as well. This is pretty basic, actually.
So the next concept worth getting into is the idea and method of semantic analysis. Semantics basically refers to the meaning of a word. When when people start arguing about the meaning of a word, it's a semantic argument. And to be honest, for me anyway, it becomes a waste of time. It's even more annoying because in my academic field, law, we're practically swimming in semantic arguments. It wasn't until a recent 3-hour conversation with my good friend Isaac, who some of you may know as Ask Yourself, that I really understood to a good extent why some arguments were semantic and what this meant. We were talking in the context of the debate, using the term lightly here, between natural law theorists and legal positivists. Basically, the first group says the law is connected to morality, the second group says it's not. It took some time, but eventually I realized...
Hang on, what?
Basically, the first group says the law is connected to morality, the second group says it's not. It took some time, but eventually I realized, with the help of my friend, the debate was semantic.
No, the natural law theorists don't think the law is related to morality because that's not a distinguishing feature. Morality can be downstream from law. It may be the case that it is a moral principle that you abide by the law, and it's not that the law is connected to morality, it's that morality as a concept is referring to being embedded within a kind of ethical social fabric. There is an appropriate way to be that is conditioned by your institutions, and that is where morality comes from. In fact, that's the earliest notion of morality. The natural law theorist is going to say that there is something embedded in the world that makes some legal edicts correct because they align with it. They align with something about the teleological nature of things and of humans. Whereas the legal positivist is going to defy that. This is going to be a purely institutional structure. This is something that emerges from human practice. It's not something that emerges from human nature.
And when a debate is semantic, there's no actual proposition in dispute. It is therefore not really a substantial debate. The natural law theorists are just going to argue their definition of the law is the most correct, and the legal positivists are going to argue that their definition of the law is the most correct.
What are you, a fucking liberal?
If, like me, you are generally not interested in time-wasting semantics, being able to identify when people are just arguing over the meaning of the word is super clarifying and a major time saver. FYI, some examples of substantial debates.
Okay, but you don't even understand the terms of that debate, though.
That is, where there is a real proposition in dispute, is something like, God exists. No, God does not exist. Or, it's bad to create life. No, it's not bad to create life. So these debates are not just about the meaning of a word that's likely just going to trace back to what each person thinks. There's a real disagreement about something. The next one I want to go through is called epistemic contextualism.
Hang on, wait a minute.
When people are just arguing over the meaning of the word is super clarifying and a major time saver. FYI, some examples of substantial debates, that is, where there is a real proposition in dispute, is something like, God exists. No, God does not exist.
Well, hang on. How is that substantial, though? Like, think about this for 5 seconds. God, in debates of this sort, typically stands in for something like being or ultimate good or some universal principle like love or justice or whatever, right? But then in those cases, God, as the thing being described, has been completely absorbed by the thing describing it. God is love. Well, then we just have love, don't we? God has sort of disappeared into this concept. God is justice. Well, it's disappeared into this concept. Congratulations, we're Platonists again. God is being. Well, then God's kind of gone from the equation. Now we're back. Now we're Spinozas. You see the problem here? Like these completely unravel due to semantics. Why? Because at root, what you're calling a substantial argument actually is nothing but semantics.
Or, it's bad to create life. No, it's not bad to create life. So these debates are not just about the meaning of a word.
It is bad to create life, until we abolish sex.
That's likely just going to trace back to what each person thinks. There's a real disagreement about something. The next one I want to go through is called epistemic contextualism, or EC, as I'm going to refer to it.
Easy.
So, you know how people try and challenge what you know or claim to know to the point of being ridiculous. It's kind of like a reductio, but just more vulgar and often, on my view, dumb, time-wasting, and dishonest. So an example would be, if you don't know that you're not really in the Matrix, how do you know what you had for breakfast? Without EC, you have to resort to things like, that's not reasonable, or, I don't know, but I'm okay with that, which aren't really satisfying to me. But what EC allows you to do is simply say, my knowledge is based on a context-specific framework. And so it generally excludes having to know things like, what is our true reality? Are we all just riding on the back of a giant turtle, etc.? So there's obviously a lot more to this, but for the purpose of this talk, I think it's sufficient enough to be aware of EC as a concept to employ against these type of annoying sophists who try, they try and say that nothing can be known because everything cannot be known, basically. Long story short, there's no reason to be led down rabbit holes where the knowledge you need to justify means something completely unachievable. So I feel like understanding empirical claims, semantic
That's just baby's first pragmatism. That's not that interesting.
analysis, and epistemic contextualism is so integral to one's quality of thinking. It's made such a difference for me, as well as formal logic, which is a lot more involved, but I think just knowing a little bit is a huge help. I'll mention here modality as well, though it's kind of separate, but it's kind of tangential to what I'm talking about as well. Modality in logic is the classification of logical propositions according to their asserting or denying the possibility, impossibility, contingency, or necessity of their content. So in very simplified terms, modality relates to whether something is possible or not, or the possibility status of it. For example, consider a debate regarding wild animal rights. So I personally want to destroy and change nature so it's not a holocaust for wild animals, which it currently is. Person X claims that it's not possible to alter nature, nor is it possible to transform it to the extent that I desire. And he frames it just like this. It's not possible. We can't do this. We literally cannot change nature. But what he really objects to in this particular debate or conversation is the idea of interfering with nature. Presumably because, like most people, he's been brainwashed into thinking nature holds some kind of innate moral value.
No, I'm pretty sure it's because, of the power of a god or the economic resources to approximate thereto. That's an absurd proposition that you're going to... How would you do this exactly? You're going to... there are carnivorous animals that don't eat vegetables.
That shouldn't be interfered with. So that was his real issue, not the proposition that we are unable to change nature. Knowing what kind of modality is being engaged with here is helpful. It's clearly not the case that destroying nature is impossible. In fact,
It's pretty impossible. One, you have a very impoverished notion of how life forms and ecosystems work. Also, a strange prejudice against the worth of microorganisms, which would not survive that bizarre. What? I'm sorry. How? How would you do this? You're gonna genetically modify all the predators to eat and farm? What? Ugh. What is this? I'm gonna check her channel after this. She must have something. She must have something about this. That's a weird ass thing to say.
in fact, we've been proven to be quite good at it.
Exactly, genetically engineered lions that eat carrots. But what are you gonna do with the ones you haven't genetically engineered, Patricia? Those are the ones that are eating the other animals. You're just gonna kill them all?
So obviously this person's real issue was with something else. Like being across semantic analysis, you can often just get straight to the point and attack from there. So you can just straight up say, what actually are we talking about here? Is your objection based on whether X is possible, or are you making a moral objection?
Both. It's not possible. You'd have to warp animals beyond the point of being the same thing, so you wouldn't be saving them. You would be replacing them with some other modified thing, assuming you could even do this. And you would actually have not stopped. I mean, let's go by the same logic you were using with the antinatalist thing. It's like, well, if we got rid of all humans, it wouldn't decrease animal suffering or total suffering because of wild animal suffering. It's like, well, maybe it would. Or maybe it would decrease the ratio of animals that are suffering versus the ones that are flourishing at any given moment. But similarly, what you would be accomplishing here would not stop the constant destruction of microorganisms or just smaller organisms that are simply destroyed in the course of other animals simply walking around. Like insects are smashed and crushed and ground up constantly just by the normal soft movements of animals, not even engaging in predatory action. Every step you take, you are crushing untold numbers of organisms. Every time you wave your hand in the air, you're smashing them somewhere. Your body temperature is cooking them constantly. I don't know. I don't know. I guess maybe those things don't suffer, but like you don't know that, and other organisms smash into each other. I don't know. It's whatever.
Of some sort. What's the modality of this discussion?
She's been drinking the Dr. Avi Kool-Aid. Is this a thing Dr. Avi does?
Obviously, this area of philosophy, there is so much to learn, and I'm clearly in the process of doing just that. Philosophy is not my main field, as most of you know, but I can't reiterate enough how substantial and helpful it has been to my work, my quality of thinking, and really just to my life. I mean, once you understand these basic things, your clarity of thinking and the confidence you have in yourself and your arguments is really quite astounding.
Okay, maybe confidence was the wrong takeaway. Maybe keep going a little bit, then get that confidence. Because I think the confidence right now, you're getting a little ahead of yourself there, Pat.
And I meant what I said at the start of this video. I really think that on an individual level, you will intellectually disintegrate without knowing some of these basic concepts. I think not implementing this into our education system from grade 1 on up has greatly disadvantaged society at large. So I'm going to leave links to channels and resources I have found particularly helpful in these topics in the
Resources, introduction to formal logic with philosophical applications, and then just ask yourself channel. Oh god, she debates. Oh wait, no, it's just taking on... That's an octopus. That's an octopus. We need to see her debate the octopus.
Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Patricia. I'm a vegan, I'm a feminist, I'm an Australian qualified lawyer. I'm not a pacifist, a moderate, or a politician. I am a freedom fighter. Now, humanity as a whole is really just a filthy pandemic crawling across the earth, but even I
like her shirt.
admit there are times where I meet someone and they ignite just the tiniest flame of hope that we might someday evolve into something other than a parasitic bacteria feasting off the bodies of other living beings. Okay, so...
Hey, what's your problem with parasitic bacteria, lady? God created them too.
So it's my personal opinion that most humans are not fundamentally good or fundamentally bad. Most people, I think, are just products of their culture and...
Better question. Thank you for the 10 NZ dollars. No cheers. Better question. How would you design a vegan ecosystem to be cultivated outside of Earth? That is a better question, actually. You're starting from scratch. Maybe that's plausible.
They're able to be molded and manipulated by others with stronger and more persuasive ideologies. Although I do believe a small percentage of people tend to be fundamentally good, and a slightly larger percentage of people tend to be fundamentally bad. Now, when it comes to talking about bad people, that is people that engage in conduct that intentionally harms others, morally reprehensible things, I think you have, your typical kind of bad people, criminals and whatnot. And then
these are the level 2s.
You have worse people, and then you have like evil dictators, right? And then you have probably 50 feet of crap. And then you have the YouTuber So Young who tortures
level 3s
and eats animals alive for views and money. So
okay, actually that one's fair. Don't eat octopi alive, okay? Octopi probably shouldn't be killed at all. They're incredibly intelligent, incredibly sensitive organisms. Incredibly intelligent, as in, like, you probably have a lot less in common and also a lot more in common with them than you might think. Eating them alive and chewing them alive is very bad. Don't do that. If you thought about what you were doing, I don't think you would. It's a deeply vile thing to do.
So I'm not the first person to condemn So Young for her actions, and I doubt I will be the last. So Young has created a number of videos depicting severe animal suffering. The point of this video is to establish that So Young's actions are deplorable and really drive home that core message. I mean, she dismembers and decapitates animals. She eats them alive for money and views. She's based an entire career out of harming non-human animals.
Okay, we get the idea. So I don't really want to see somebody chewing up a lovely octopus to pieces. Let's look at unnatural vegan.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another Lawyer Nug. My name's Patricia, I'm a vegan, I'm a
Patricia.
feminist, I'm an Australian qualified lawyer.
We got a bookshelf. We can see books. What is this? I see Malcolm X. I see something by Bret Easton. I see Life of Pi. I can't see anything else.
I'm not a pacifist, a moderate, or a politician. I am a freedom fighter. On this channel, we generally talk about animal rights, veganism, the core philosophy of veganism, militant politics, and various other issues reserved.
Does she have anything more recent? This is from like 3 years ago. I want to see if she's developed. 10 days ago, Israel, Hamas, and animal rights. That's actually, I might actually watch that. The virtue ethics-based argument for veganism. Oh, we're in weird territory. We're in very weird territory. Huh. Culture is the death of evolution. I think I know where she's going with that, but she's wrong. How war can advance science and morality. Alright, I'm going to sleep. Have a good night, everyone. I'm going. Where am I sending you? Let's see. Almost certainly no one's still up. Wonder if Aiko's up. Let me look through my subscriptions. Oh well, looks like it's just me tonight. Well, have a good night, everyone. Take care.